God! Oh, Jesus Christ!
But you kind of get the feeling, as you're making something, that you are really doing something that is quite important here.
It's amongst the top 100 of British films of all time.
Contradicts all the styles of the Hammer films that have gone before, using the same artists. I mean, you know, Ingrid Pitt and Christopher Lee. You must think, oh, this is going to be a typical Hammer film, and it isn't.
It's faced a nightmare all through its making, through its post-production, through its travels to get distribution. Ever since the film got started in script form, there was a nightmare over it, like a black cloud.
It also gives them very strongly a sense of how difficult it really is to work in the movie business. And their best work is hidden, trashed, reviled, stamped on.
And it should be considered a cautionary tale. You know, watch this, it can happen. Avoid it.
I had, for quite an appreciable period of time, wanted to do a film in the, for want of a better word, horror movie genre, without it actually following in the rather tired footsteps of Hammer films.
Tony was looking to do something with the horror genre that was a little more intellectual. Christopher was anxious to break away from what he'd done extremely well with, of course, all the classic horror stuff.
We both liked horror films. We both crossed town to go and see the latest Hammer. But we felt that horror films, as they were done at the time, were missing something.
And it occurred to me that I had never actually seen a film on the nature of sacrifice.
The old religion, which had gone underground for many centuries after Christianity came, and that it would be fun to try and conceive of a story where the old religion had reappeared. So we searched around for a story of that kind.
So there was a consortium formed with Christopher Lee and Peter Snell, who was then the managing director of British Lion, and myself to do such a film.
They had in mind a very unusual project, and they wanted me to play one of the leads. So I went there, and we chatted and talked. They weren't very specific, either of them. All that was discussed was the fact that they were going to write the part for me.
It seemed to me also that I ought to try and dress it up in a way that provided something in the shock detective story, since after a number of pieces for the stage, like Sleuth, it was sort of expected. So I started with a checklist of who would make the ideal sacrifice. The king for a day, the man who represents the law, the man who is a virgin. So I thought if we fitted up someone with all those attachments and qualities, we had the ideal sacrifice. And in order to put it into the shock ending, a very interesting, if age-old trick is to flip it on its back and suggest that the truth is diametrically opposed to what actually the truth is. And this is the case in this film, so that as we all know, the hunter is the hunted.
And all through my friendship with Tony, we used to play games with each other. So the idea came to do a story in which an entire community played a game on one person, and that's exactly what the film is.
Robin had a heart attack at that point, and he had to rest, and his wife came to me and said, "Can you keep Robin quiet?" So I said, "There's nothing like a piece of dreary research." And the local public library had a very good section on the pagan and on the occult.
Well, the old religion was, of course, paganism. It was a propitiating religion, a religion where if you did nice things for the gods, they did nice things for you.
It's a very, very compelling world, the pagan world. And so the more we researched, the more we realized that we were onto something that was original, unique, and very exciting.
Well, the Mayday Festival is a very specific play called the Morosco play, or the Morosco dance, which goes back into the mists of time. It's certainly pre-Christian. There's always a teaser, there's always a hobby horse. It's about the renewal of life. The hobby horse covers the women to make them fertile, to make them have babies. It was a sort of pagan idea. And in Britain, a very clear version of this is down at Padstow.
I rang Tony Shaffer, who was in New York. "Oh," he said, "it's very interesting you should have rung me because I've finished the script." what are you going to call it? And he said, The Wicker Man. And I said, has that got anything to do with druids and their sacrifices? And he said, I hate you. Because I was almost the only person probably who knew what the Wicker Man really represented, pagan sacrifice.
I think I was enormously impressed by the script, actually, because usually I used to read horror scripts, and this was not a horror script. This had so much depth.
Rowan Morrison is a schoolmate of yours, isn't she? And that is her desk, isn't it? Well, isn't it?
I think you ought to know.
And you are the biggest liar of all.
Well, originally, rumour has it that Peter Cushing was supposed to play Sergeant Howie, and Cushing said that Christopher Lee had asked him, and the only reason he didn't do it was because he had other commitments.
I was responsible, I think, for Woodward because Callan was a big television series in England at the time, and he just was a great name for us.
And it's always nice to give actors fun in what they're doing, to play somebody quite unlike that, slightly uptight Christian cop, which he did gloriously well.
Britt Eklund, at the time, she was a celebrity and a good name for the picture and had all the qualities that you needed for Willow in terms of the temptations that she was about to put in front of Howie.
The other thing is that using Christopher and Ingrid, in a way, made you expect things in the film that don't actually turn up, so it makes it more surprising what actually happens.
Well, my part isn't very much, actually, you know. I mean, what can an informatic librarian do? You know, not very much, but I thought it'd be interesting to be involved in this kind of film because I thought at the time that it was going to be important.
All the extras were local. We were outside the extras limit in London, well out, and so we used anybody and everybody who was willing to come and have a laugh.
The people who lived in the area were absolutely tremendous. I mean, they really made the movie because in terms of, you had to have that crowd.
A man called John Bentley, who was a young entrepreneur in the city of London, bought British Lion, I think with an eye on Shepperton Studios. And so everybody, when he bought British Lion, was very nervous that he was going to get rid of Shepperton, which was one of the great old studios in England. And so he beseeched me to get something into production as quickly as possible to put everybody's mind at rest that he was actually going to make films. Robin Hardy, Seamus Flannery, the art director, and Jake Wright, his first assistant director, spent a long time trekking all up and down that part of Scotland. Those three literally just disappeared and finally came back with some great pictures and tapes. You could see right away what the picture was going to look like.
Locations were very carefully chosen, very apposite, and Seamus Flannery had a large hand, obviously, in finding the locations and adapting them.
We just talked generally about locations and the kind of settings we were looking for and the kind of psychic and surreal interest he had in the symbolism of Celtic mythology.
It is set in Beltane, spring, 1st of May, flowers are out, blossom on the trees, fertility rites, and we were men in suits decreed that we should be shooting it in Scotland in October and November. Problems, you can see.
It was just freezing all the time because this is a springtime film and we were shooting October, November. And in Scotland, that's not funny, it's like Poland. I mean, I'm one of those Polacks who can't stand the cold.
The crowds, we had to put ice in their mouths so their breath wouldn't steam.
Cold it was. We were shooting in November and December, and it was supposed to be spring, so we had wonderful, wonderful sunshine at times, but we had unbelievable rain, snow, sleet.
People had to travel almost every other day to a new location. And just sorting them all out every morning was like sort of sorting out a small army.
When we were shooting inside, doing an interior, and the sun came out and the wind dropped, we must catch this opportunity, out we go. I mean, things like that happened, which, yes, you had to be on your toes. Great fun.
As far as the actual shooting of the film was concerned, I thought it was a wonderful experience because I knew I was doing something quite extraordinary.
Your lordship seems strangely unconcerned.
I'm confident your suspicions are wrong, Sergeant. We don't commit murder up here. We're a deeply religious people.
I got paid nothing, and I keep repeating that to people, and they don't believe it, but it is true. And I've got the contract which proves it. Anyway, sometimes you do things for love.
I've always been told it was a low-budget production. Strangely enough, when I was working on it, it didn't seem to be.
The point was that if they paid me my normal fee, and if they paid Peter Snell as executive producer his normal fee, and everybody else their normal fees, the budget would have been, you know, unrealistic, and they wouldn't have been able to make the film.
I found that in Rowan Morrison's grave.
Little Rowan loved the March airs.
I thought Robin did a wonderful job. I thought that the art director, Seamus Flannery, did a wonderful job. I thought the clothes were superb and dead right. The whole thing came together quite beautifully.
I read it as a melodrama, and I believe that was the way that Tony Schaefer wrote it. Halfway through the production, standing on the set by the camera with Harry Waxman, to my astonishment, Robin Hardy announced it was a musical.
In the woods there grew a tree, and a fine, fine tree was he.
Music came out of Robin Hardy's research on the Druids and a lot of the ballads, the ancient English ballads, and then of course he got together with Paul Giovanni and they put the music together before we shot because most of it was to play back and it had to be an integral part of that community.
She says, do you want to try?
I think that all religions rely very heavily on music. For the old religion, music was very important too. Quite a lot of them used in the film were done by Robbie Burns, the great Scottish poet, and he adapted some of them and he wrote some special lyrics for others.
And the music was absolutely superb. It's such a pity that the composer is no longer with us.
Paul Giovanni, who composed it and played some of it, had never scored a feature film before, so it was quite experimental in a way. But at the same time, it varies incredibly from being very atmospheric to suddenly almost becoming a musical.
Brett Eklund did this dance. The powers that be, I don't know who, decided that there were certain aspects of Brett Eklund that might be better doubled. And so we shot the scene with Britt Eklund, and then we said, thank you very much, Britt, that's all for today. Took her downstairs, put her in a limousine to drive away, and in another limousine lying there was a body double, who we then brought up and got her to do the dance as well.
The Wicker Man is specifically Celtic, and it is well recorded. Burnt their prisoners, their victims, their animals as sacrifices to the gods in huge wicker men.
There was an illustration which I found in a book of an actual wicker man. And from that, I was able to conceive how it was possible to put people inside a wickerwork man.
To sacrifice these people in between heaven and earth in the tree was particularly pleasing to this female deity. And if they did that, they might get victory in their next battle, or their crops would do well, or whatever they hoped for, whatever they prayed for.
And the big problem, of course, was to actually physically do it with the kind of budget we had.
There were actually 3 wicker men. There was one which was just down to the thighs, and there were 2 complete ones.
To cut down on the labor costs, I made the structure of a man, but out of wicker hurdles, which are used for sheep, containing sheep, on hill farms. And these come about 5, 6, 7, 8 foot long, and they're woven. The original drawing, sketch for the proposed wicker man, I actually filled the eyes with daisies. And the daisies in the eyes were just too friendly somehow. And this was bothering me because it wasn't enigmatic enough. And then I went from that to a more sculptural effect, and that was by indenting the wickerwork of the face in. So part of it was out, and this cast a shadow as if there were 2 eyes. But then it looked sort of slit-eyed and evil. And finally, I did a sketch starting with nothing. I thought, now what can I do to it? And I thought, wait a minute, with no eyes, No nose and no mouth, just the shape of the head. That's it. It's a blank face. And it's quite ominous because you read into it what you want to read into it. And I'm a great believer in leaving something for the audience to decide upon themselves.
It wasn't just a question of the Wicker Man being ready, it was getting all the animals into them, which was a big deal. And there was a slight standoff with the RSPCA, the animal welfare people, who I think all along were a bit frightened that we were going to go mad and actually burn the poor animals.
A rumor started that real animals were going to be burnt in the Wicker Man. And petitions drawn up, and animal rights people howling about all over the place. And I put out an inflammatory little notice that only cuddly, woolly animals were going to be burnt, but nothing else. And of course, they began to see they were being very stupid indeed.
Awake, ye heathens, and howl! It is the Lord who hath laid waste your orchards!
The final piece about spouting all this religious and biblical language to everybody was supposed to be done on a certain day, to be decided during a certain week, depending on the wind and the weather.
When the weather suddenly came right for us to go out on Burrowhead to shoot the Wicker Man burning, and we just said to Edward, well, right, we're going to do it now.
And I there's no way I could learn it overnight, no way.
We made our big cue cards for him. I won't call them idiot boards because it wasn't in this case.
So I had to have these big, enormous boards, and there were sort of flags as well, hung around a part of a cliff, and then held up by guys.
But he, I think, ad-libbed a great deal, and it's a marvellous bloody performance on his part.
And ye shall all die! Accursed!
And poor Edward must have gone through hell because we were all bitterly cold.
He just had this shift on and he was barefoot. And he kept coming to me because I was sitting on the grass, pretending I was warm. And he kept coming, putting his freezing plates under my frock. And I said, Edward, stop that. They're going to take you and burn you. Your feet won't be cold then.
The characters of the three leading actresses really come out when we were shooting the final burning scene on Burrowhead out on the cliff tops in November. And it was bitterly cold. Comes one moment when we have to reload the camera or something, pause for 2 or 3 minutes. So I told the wardrobe to take the coats out for the three leading actresses. And Britt Ekman just seized her coat, put it on. Diane Chalento said, thank you very much, and put her coat on. And Ingrid Pitt said, if the extras haven't got time to put their coats on, I haven't got time. Which I thought was, defines the three artists quite clearly.
And obviously, it wasn't me in the very final stages of the Wicker Man, but it was me right up until the final stage, and that was pretty frightening, I must say.
Poor Edward Woodward was shut up in the Wicker Man, and above him, one floor up above him, was a goat. And the goat was rather frightened, and when you're frightened, you urinate frequently. And poor Edward Woodward suffered here.
It was very tricky, very dangerous, very worrying. However, you do these things when you're young.
And everything happened right. I mean, the sun did what it was supposed to do, and the fire did what it was supposed to do, and the head toppled when it was supposed to. It's, my experience, very rare that all those things go right together, so we were dead lucky.
Effectively, we finished shooting early December, early days of September '72. Michael Dealey and Barry Spikings, who were two producers in the industry in England at the time, joined British Lion and joined the board with a view to preparing it for sale to EMI.
Peter Snell was fired, I think, from the British Lion, just as we reached the end of making the picture. And there is a general policy anyway with people in film studios that you tend to trash or abandon the projects of your predecessors to show how much better you are.
The moment they came in, well, what have you been doing? Wicker Man we've been doing, Don't Look Now we've been doing. They began to look at the first assemblies of both those pictures and didn't like either of these pictures.
And their reaction, of course, was sheer disbelief. They had been used to selling masterpieces like On the Buses and the Carry On films. This was altogether out of their league.
So at that point, we had already finished the fine cut of the film, the director's cut. And a copy of it had already gone to Roger Corman, who Peter Snell very sensibly thought of as an ideal distributor for the film.
He was at the time the king of the independent film community and really had mentored a lot of very successful directors that are with us today.
We were distributing for Bergman, Fellini, Truffaut, a number of European directors, and I saw this picture as something that would be somewhere between an art film and a commercial film.
And so he was just the one guy in America for this market who I felt could give us an idea of how this picture could be made to play, what approach we would take to marketing.
On one level, it was a fantasy film with a little bit of horror. On another level, it was more intelligent than most of that type of film and could be sold not necessarily as an art film, but as sort of an upper bracket film, vaguely in that genre.
And while no one got very rich getting distributed by Roger Corman, they got a good distribution.
My biggest single regret with Wicker Man today, I guess, looking back, would be the fact that Roger Corman did not end up with the U.S. distribution rights for the picture, because he would have done a wonderful job.
I wanted to distribute the film, and I gave what I thought was a reasonable advance. One of the majors put up more money. It was simply that.
When Peter was removed, Roger's offer, which was, I think, quite a relatively small amount of money, but he was going to spend a lot of money on the distribution, was not acceptable to the new management, who wanted as much cash coming in as possible in order to maximize their sale to EMI.
And then, in some sort of nasty, foot-stamping, little childish way, it seems to me, they were going to show that they didn't really care about the movie that British Lion had made, and they didn't like it anyway. They didn't really understand it.
And they called me up to the office and said, well, this is the situation. It's decided, they say categorically that the film is too long.
And so they fiddled about with it like mad and took it out of the director's hands and made a very much shorter movie out of it.
And it was either 13 or 15 minutes too long. I can't really remember which. And they said, well, go ahead and do it, and we want to get rid of this as soon as possible.
The distributors asked us if the film was a little bit long and would we like it or still distribute it if it were shortened. And we said we thought it might be improved if it were shortened. It was a little bit long, but that we would take it either way.
And so they simply buried the film. And that meant cutting it to the point where it would be much more difficult to distribute in the States. And selling it to a tax shelter group there, who they must have known would not really ever distribute it.
I was more or less in a situation where I had to do what I was told to do.
The new management then just sliced the picture up like salami.
I had a screening with the heads of production of this new company, and they were highly delighted. They were so delighted, they sent me a crate of whiskey.
And I was very disappointed because the film had been gutted.
All sorts of scenes that I remember that we shot and were not there. So I thought, this is very strange. I wonder what's happened. So I went upstairs afterwards, purely out of courtesy, to say thank you to Michael Dealey, who had replaced Peter Snell as the managing director of British Lion. And he sat at his desk. He didn't get up when my wife walked in, which is always pretty good guide towards somebody's character and behavior. And he said, well, what do you think of the film? And I said, well, I think it's a marvelous film, Michael. And Dennis said, yes, I think so too, and so did my wife. And he looked up at me and he said, I think it's one of the 10 worst films I've ever seen.
It was a sort of kick in the teeth to everybody, really. You know, it doesn't matter too much to actors. Actors, you know, have done the movie and they move on to something else. But when you've got, you know, people who've put their lives into it, like the director and the writer and the people who are actually producing it, it was an awful, terrible thing to do.
The original script started off in Scotland with Edward Woodward receiving the letter addressed to him only, which quite set the difficulties at the beginning.
There was a scene where Lord Summerisle brings a young boy to be introduced to it was a sort of his sexual awakening by the landlord's daughter, and it's intercut with some snails and moving rather sensuously.
You don't see that Christopher Lee, who's actually in the first night, you don't see that he's actually orchestrating everything. You don't get that feeling of dread that comes from him pulling the strings.
All the fertility scenes, the dance scenes with the little girls.
The baker, the fishmonger, the doctor, the chemist.
A lot of the religious mumbo-jumbo had been cut out.
There was some wonderful material where Christopher talks about apples as if they were kind of, you know, some wonderful gift from the gods.
It had been cut down to appeal to audiences with an extremely short attention span.
I saw it again, and I thought, well, I don't really miss anything. I know this is very controversial stuff, but I didn't really miss anything because I thought a lot of the things with the apples went on a bit, and we could do without it.
These scenes needed cutting, but they didn't need completely obliterating.
Once I had left the premises, both Michael and Delia and Barry Spikings had no faith in the picture at all, any more than they had in Don't Look Now, so they matched them up as a double bill, which was even in the 70s unheard of, in the sense that double bills had come and gone. And they really just kind of got it out there in the UK on a minimum basis.
No press show, no publicity, until eventually, I think under pressure from various quarters, they did actually put the picture out.
The net result was that it did not have the kind of showing that it deserved.
I rang all the film critics I knew, and I said, would you do me a favor, and I will pay for your seats. Would you go and see this film? It's on now. And nobody asked me to pay for their seats, and they went as individuals. They paid for their own, and the acclaim for the film was virtually unanimous.
But there was an even greater result, which is, as I say, to come down to today. It turned it into almost the film they didn't want you to see.
So I rang up Peter Snell, I rang up Tony Schaffer, and I rang up Robin Hardy, and I said, look, what's happened to the rest of the stuff that was taken out? Because it's so marvelous, you know, can't we do something about this?
They probably got on to a British Lion and said, look, we've got your film has been finished and it's out. We're sending your negative down to your vaults in Shepperton Studios, which they did.
Robin Hardy went to the vaults at Shepperton Studios to look for the negative and the outtakes. He was met by somebody who he doesn't remember his name, in a terrible state of agitation.
There was a giant motorway being built, the M3, past Shepperton Studios, and the order was given to clear out the vaults, get rid of all the old positive trims.
The trucks came to take away all rubbish and trimmings and lots of stuff, and some idiot put it with the wrong cans.
The negative that came down from the lab was inadvertently put into the same vault, and the vault manager clearly put it in with the positive.
I can't remember anything like this ever happening in my entire life. I've made a terrible, terrible mistake. The most awful things have happened. We've lost the negative and the outtakes.
There's no question that all that stuff, including the negative from the Wicker Man, was inadvertently loaded and dumped into the M3.
I can't think of any other time that happened.
It's like, you know, a vicar taking the sacramental wine and using it for cleaning the floor. You don't do that with a negative.
But it could happen.
I said, well, how do you lose or mislay 1 or 2 or maybe 300 cans of film?
Christopher quite rightly says it has to be somewhere people don't destroy negative.
My belief is that it still exists somewhere, and only a very small number of people know where.
To us, the movie really had potential as an art house type film.
And we were very fortunate to find these young people who wanted to distribute the picture and who were prepared to go to great lengths to get some form of negative so we could restore it.
And we very quickly came up against a brick wall, which was that the negative no longer existed.
And by a weird collection of circumstances, the only long print available, I guess, in the world was the one we had.
So we were very excited when the long version of The Wicker Man came into town.
Christopher and Robin Hardy, you probably know, working with another small independent, began to work about 30 prints around the country.
Christopher Lee cooperated magnificently in helping us publicize this movie, often going to small towns like Jacksonville, Mississippi.
Delights, my work goes forward day and night. We went to Baton Rouge, which was the University of Louisiana. The moment that film was shown to the young students, it took off all around the world.
And it just built a reputation.
Amazing reviews. Long runs.
With a run in Boston that broke house records at the Orson Welles Cinema.
In San Francisco, it ran for 32 weeks.
And the result has become one of the great cult movies of all time.
About 5 years ago, I think I went through a stage where I just watch it constantly.
The whole popularity of the Wicker Man film is mushrooming,
Yes,
and it's finally gaining the recognition that it deserves.
I could sit there, I could just say every line word for word.
Like when I've been to the locations, I'll have, looked at the video and I'll have watched the location that I've just been to on the video time and time and time again.
Yeah, it definitely runs into the hundreds.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Film Theatre. Would customers attending this evening's screening in NFT1 of The Wicker Man now please start and take your seats.
The business, as you probably know, is run mostly by zombies who are overpaid and are so timid that all they can do is reproduce something that's already been done a trillion times. And so we were very fortunate that this picture, which had not been done a trillion times or even once, has succeeded.
I think the cult of the Wicker Man has grown simply because I can't, in the 28 years since we made it, think of another picture that was remotely similar.
I have said over the years that I think it's probably the best film I've ever been in.
I didn't think it was Citizen Kane on the Battle of Britain, it was sort of quite a nice film.
I think if it had a major release at the time, it would have been a reasonable success. I do not think, strangely enough, that it would have been the success it is. I think that the whole history of that movie is part of its strange credibility.
This vehemence in slogging to get distribution and paying money and the amount of people deceiving each other in the process of it. Yes, I am actually quite amazed that the Wicker Man is still around.
And I suppose the greatest thing that can happen to an actor is even if just once in his life or her life, you do something that lasts.
Well, I think the film is timeless in a way.
So that's a great warm feeling.
You may not believe in occult magic, but you'll be hard not to, faced with the objects put in the way of this film succeeding, and it survives. The more you cut it back, the more it grows.
Be there.